Maneva na say ma PENDREAM TV. PENDREAM TV there osia dem yopo.
The body was finally brought to Ghana.
Yes.
And you remember those because they were buried in Nkroful.
Buried in Nkroful. One of the things that I remember was that the body had been embalmed to last several years, like Mao Zedong's body.
Yeah,
and
China.
So on. But we were reckless. We buried him in a grave which was not properly sealed, and we allowed water to seep into the grave and destroyed the body.
This is in Nkroful.
In Nkroful. And that's why we moved, the body was moved to Accra and buried at the Kwame Nkrumah Mausoleum. It's sealed completely. Initially, it was not meant to be sealed. It was meant to be in a casket that people could see him, feely, you know, and so on. But we destroyed it, you know.
The 70s, Achampong started well, came down, and then 79, a young flight lieutenant burst onto the scene. What are your memories of that time?
As a matter of fact, when June 4th occurred in 1979, I was not in Ghana. I was then in Philadelphia, you know, and I heard.
What was happening there? What took you there?
Well, I was on a study tour of the U.S.
Okay. As a journalist?
No, as a PR practitioner then.
Okay.
As a PR practitioner
All
then,
right.
you know.
Was that your first time in the USA?
I think so.
Did you get culture shock?
No, I didn't.
You didn't?
You know, I probably know more states in the United States than most Americans. You know, I've been to a lot of the states. You know, so I was in Philadelphia when the coup occurred, and when I first heard of the coup, I was shocked. Shocked because I had known Flight Lieutenant Jerry John Rawlings.
You had known him before?
Known him because he used to be around some friends of mine.
Okay.
You know, and so on. So I'd known him. And I'd never thought of him as a political person. You know, those were the days when he used to ride a motorcycle with Hell's Angels written at the back and so on. You know?
Really?
So I'd never thought of him as a political person. And when I heard that he had taken over, I was shocked. You know, I actually felt that something was dramatically wrong. You know. My host in the US then decided that I shouldn't come back to Ghana because Ghana was not safe and so on. But I decided to arrive, to come back to Ghana. Came back to Ghana on about the 9th of June and so on. And I used to host a very popular program on GBC with Emilia Krumwell-Adama. We used to do a program called In Town.
In Town?
In Town.
What were the contents of the program?
Oh, just happenings around the town.
What's happening?
It's a magazine program,
Okay.
more or less what was happening.
Live or kind of pre-recorded?
Live.
Okay.
So on the first Saturday after my arrival, I was interviewed by Emilia Krumwell-Adama. And you know, Emilia was big. Emilia Krumwell-Adama was big. She interviewed me on the coup d'etat, on the revolution as it was then called. And I remember saying that there had been no revolution. I remember saying that what was happening was anarchical and that it was going to take Ghana nowhere and so on. This was, I think, June 11th, I think. And the panic, in those days.
At GBC?
In the country, there was total panic. Who is this young man sitting on television condemning the revolution a few days after it had started, after Achampong had been executed, and so on? Who is this guy? You understand? That was the general feeling. So it was after this interview that I established a link with Major Boachija. Okay, I was first contacted by Jana Pinting, well-known journalist and so on, who said that Major Boachija wanted to talk to me and that the whole of the Armed Forces Revolutionary Council listened to that interview. You know, that they were in a meeting in Burma camp or so, and all of them listened to that interview. So eventually I got on to Boachijan, and Boachijan told me that he agreed with me.
Although he was part of the
This
people.
was the spokesperson of the Armed Forces Revolutionary Council. He told me that he agreed with me, that he's an Nkrumahist, he's a Pan-Africanist, and so on. but that I should be careful. I shouldn't go around opening my mouth, talking by heart, and so on. And that anything could have happened to me, and that he had to restrain his colleagues and so on. Whether it was true or not, I don't know. But this is what Major Boachijan, told me. So that was my first encounter with the revolution, so-called revolution and so on. And it continued, continued.
And you maintain your views that it wasn't a revolution till today?
Well, eventually the AFRC got split into two, with one faction claiming to be progressive in Nkrumahist and so on. So we worked with that faction as against the other faction, which was led by Jerry John Rawlings and so on. But so many things have happened, since then. So many things have happened since then. One of the problems that I had with this so-called continuing revolution from 1979 into the 80s and so on was around 1982-83, when the government adopted first the Economic Recovery Program and the Structural Adjustment Program. And the consequences have been dire. In 1983, 300,000 workers lost their jobs. 300,000 workers lost their jobs as a result of our embrace of the IMF and the World Bank. By 1987, thereabout, the city had been devalued by more than 23,000%. We privatized state enterprises. We actually set up the Divestiture Implementation Committee to privatize state enterprises and so many things. And I could not support these measures, And that is why for a long time it did appear, well, it was, that I was in opposition against the PNDC, and suffered for it,
Personally, when was the first time you were picked up?
82.
In the morning, in the evening?
In the night, actually.
Where were you?
82. I was picked up in Burma camp. Long story. Picked up in Burma camp. Apparently, I had fallen into the hands of somebody who was working with the PNDC very closely, but who was later on identified to be one of the key agents of the Central Intelligence Agency of the USA. You remember the spy swap?
Susudis?
No. The chief of staff.
Chief of staff.
Actually then, the military chief of staff actually then, was found, I think he was in the Navy at the time, was found to be working for the Central Intelligence Agency, and I happened to have fallen into his hands, and many things happened.
So they picked you up. Were you scared?
No, I've never really been scared about these arrests and so on, I got to know at one stage that there had been an instruction to kill me. I got to know at one stage that there had been an instruction to kill me. And to be honest with you, I owe my life to a very, very special friend, an officer, who has retired as a general. It was General Richter Ado, who came to the guard room where I was being kept, and he instructed the guards that nobody was allowed to take me out of the guard room without his permission or the permission of Flight Lieutenant Rawlings. And that if I was taken out of the guard room and anything happened to me, he would hold the guards personally responsible for what happened to me. And that's what saved me. So my life was actually saved by General Richter Ado. And I've forever been grateful to him for saving my life.
What's it like being inside a guard room?
It's horrible. It's not like the normal prison. I mean, in the guard room, the food is good.
The food is good?
Yeah, we eat the same food the soldiers eat.
Okay.
So the food is good, So there's no problem about food. But we have problems with the sanitary conditions because we're too many for the guard room. The guard room was choked, filled.
How many people in the guard room, and what's the size of this guard room?
Guard room is about the size of this studio, maybe 2 separate rooms, about the size of this studio. And at one stage, I guess we would have numbered more than 50, maybe about 60 in that small space.
Wow. Standing room only?
I could sleep. I was in the same cell with Nana Okuche-Bekwin, who was the chairman of the PNP, And to tell you about the conditions there, the psychological conditions. Okuche-Bekwin was in the cell with us, and they brought his son. They caught his son and brought his son to the same cell.
With the father?
With the father. And the instruction was that they should never speak to each other. And that if they caught them speaking to each other, they'll be punished. So you have a father and son in the same cell who could not speak to each other. This is torture. This is plain torture. But they endured it. At one stage, I was in the same cell with Naval Lieutenant Dennis. Dennis. And he really suffered. I've never seen anybody who can endure so much pain. In the night, they will come for Naval Lieutenant Dennis. Was it captain or lieutenant? I don't know. But he was in the Navy. Take him out throughout the night and bring him at dawn. And by the time they brought him at dawn, he would be like a vegetable. He couldn't talk, he couldn't walk, and you see sand on his body. So obviously he was taken to the beach and tortured, and it happened many times, So this chap will come to the guard room, be lying there 48 hours or so, and then he'll start to move his body. And then he will start exercising, I think he must have been a very strong person. And then in 3 days or so, he'll start walking, And then they'll come for him again and repeat the same thing over and
Back
over
to
and
zero.
over again, And he was an extraordinary soldier. I mean, his courage, his ability to take pain and so on was so extraordinary and so inspiring,
How many times did you get picked up in those times, in the 80s?
The last time we sat down and counted, I'd been to prison 18 times.
18?
Yeah, 18 times. The last time we actually counted, I'd been to prison 18 times.
What are the various prisons?
Well, I've been in the guard room in what was known as Gonda Barracks, I think twice. I've been detained at the police headquarters a couple of times. Been detained at the Bureau of National Investigation cells a couple of times. I've been detained at the Osherford prison. I've been detained at the Akwesi prisons. I've been detained at the Navrongo prison, Tamale prison, and several police cells, Accra Central Police Cell, and so on and so on.
What was the longest time that you'd been put in behind bars?
6 months.
6 full months?
Yeah, 6 months. 6 months. This was the period when I was first arrested, taken to Akwesi prison, and then moved from Akwesi prison to Tamale prison, and eventually to Navrongo prison. One arrest.
Did they ever tell you why they were arresting you?
No.
So you were there for 6 months and then one day?
There was one time I was told about why I had been arrested, and I was actually interrogated, but that was once.
Okay.
This was in, I suspect, 1992 or 93. I've been arrested with Professor Dubuahini. And we were charged with obstruction of justice. Okay, obstruction of justice. It happened, remember there was a bomb attack on the airport, not a bomb, I mean a dynamite attack on the Kotoka International Airport by a group called Farigan. Okay. Now this group was led by an Alhaji Damba, and they had come from outside to carry out this operation, and they came to see us. Of course, I told them I was not interested. Edubuahini apparently told them he was not interested, and so on. But during the investigations into these explosions, Edubuahini and I were picked up. and we were charged with the obstruction of justice and tried at the National Public Tribunal. So I actually went through interrogation. There was a proper charge sheet and so on. I think that was about the only time that I had been told why I had been arrested.
Were you defended by a lawyer?
Interestingly, President Kufuor offered to defend me, to be my lawyer in the trial.
Okay.
You know.
Did you accept?
Well, if you see the photographs of the trial, you will see President Kufuor sitting behind me, and he wanted to be my lawyer, but I refused. Because I insisted that the trial was political, had nothing to do with the law. It was a political trial, and I thought that nobody could articulate the politics of the moment better than I could do. So I did not accept him as my lawyer, but he still helped me. He actually took my notes.
Okay.
Okay. So you see him sitting behind me in the tribunal, taking notes and so on, and he took my notes, and it was very helpful.
And you defended yourself, in essence?
Yes, I defended myself. But I knew the trial was not going anywhere.
and you were right?
I was absolutely right. Because you see, to be tried in a court, they have to read your caution statement. Okay. And I know what I put in the caution statement. And I knew that that caution statement could not be read anywhere.
What did you put in the caution statement?
A lot. My caution statement was almost a book. And I put everything in it.
That was your strategy?
Yeah. Yeah. I remember when I was writing the statement, and 1 hour had passed, I was still,
you were still writing
and so on. And Professor Dubois was sitting by me, and then he looked at me and said, "What are you writing? Why are you writing so many things? You're going to implicate all of us." And I said, "Prof, just relax. I know what I'm doing. Nobody can read this statement in any court, anywhere in the world." And I suspect that that was one of the reasons why the trial did not go far.
What was the most horrible of the prisons that you were locked up in?
Oh, most of the prisons were very horrible.
They're horrible, huh?
But perhaps the most horrible was Navrongo. Navrongo, I was kept in the remand cell for a couple of weeks. Okay.
That's in the police station side of things?
Yeah. The remand cell. It was mud house.
A mud house?
Mud house. But there's so many of us in remand at the time, and I was wondering why they put me in remand, that we all could not sleep at the same time. We had to run a shift.
Shift sleeping?
Half of us would stand and half of us would sleep for a number of hours, and then we change over.
You wake the person up and say, get up.
It's time. Because there wasn't sleeping
There's
space.
There's no space. You have to manage.
So that was really horrible. And then there was a shortage of water and so on. So Navrongo perhaps was the worst prison. But all of them were bad. I mean, I remember the first day we went to Osherford. Osherford, it was myself, Akoto Ampao, Raf Kugbe, and Kwekubaku. Okay. We were taken there in the night, I think around midnight or so.
They always come for you at night, right?
Not always. I've been arrested during the days.
Broad daylight, you've been arrested
but most of the time
at night, okay.
Midnight, So in the morning we're opened and we get into the yard. Wow. This is television, so. But the place for easing yourself and taking your bath is just right there.
Osherford.
You take your bath in the open. Everybody sees you and so on, And they still had this, dugouts.
Yes.
That's where you ease yourself.
Wow.
And there were worms, maggots, all over the place, And there was a sign there. The use of disinfectants is strictly prohibited. That should give you an idea.
Exactly. Strictly prohibited.
Use of disinfectants is strictly prohibited in a place infested with maggots.
So this message was for the warders? That
for everybody. And
wow.
Then I was trying to find out why, and I was told that it was because they feared that people could use them to commit suicide.
You drink it instead of disinfecting.
So it was a very horrible experience. One of my most horrible experiences was also, I think, in the Kwesi prison. where they serve the food in chamber pots.
No.
Yeah.
No.
Yeah, food was served in chamber pots.
No.
Yeah.
What was the food?
Yeah.
What was the food?
Oh, the food.
What's prison food like?
Okay. There is what they call the manpower and zontoli. That was standard. Okay.
What are the ingredients?
I think the manpower was the soup. I think so.
Okay.
Okay. And this is soup. If you looked at the soup, you could see the few ingredients at the bottom. You could see them, actually see them. It was transparent. Okay.
Transparent soup.
Yeah, transparent. You could see a few ingredients at the bottom. Just water, basically. And the zontoli was supposed to be banku, but it was hard as wood. Okay, so this was the food. And of course,
What?
I didn't have to eat it because we got help from even some of the warders were so kind. They gave us food. A lot of the time, food came from outside the prison. In fact, in the Navrongo prison, I had a little money, that had come from friends and so on. Even some of the cadets of the revolution
We'll come and visit you.
came and visited. Those who had fallen out with
Yes.
the government and so on, they all came. And so on. So I would give out money to buy a whole pig.
A whole pig.
And then the prisoners who went out to do hard labor, would buy the pig and bring, and then we'll cook it for everybody in the prison, So that's how we overcame some of our problems. In the Tamale prison, we had the most senior person in charge. He was very sympathetic. In fact, the first night when we arrived in the prison, he told us that he was not a fool and that he had to face reality, and that Nkrumah came from prison and became head of state,
Yes.
and so on. And that we should not be worried, and that prison is a place for nurturing leaders and so on. So he knew that one day we'll be leaders. So he was not going to subject us to torture and all that.
This is the warder?
This is the head of the prison.
Prison, okay.
I mean, he had a conversation with us and actually instructed that they should cook our meals separately. I was there with Akoto Ampao.
Okay. So political prisoners had different conditions
In that prison,
in
not
that
in all
prison.
prisons.
In that prison.
In some prison, you were in trouble, But in that prison, this prison head, I think he was watching his back, protecting his future.
Exactly
And
so. Yeah. But in other prisons, you would mix with the common criminals as well?
Yeah.
Murderers, rapists, whoever.
Well, the first day I was taken to the Nsawam prisons, I was put in the same cell with a South Korean who had just been convicted for murder.
He told you himself, or you heard it from
The officers told me before they put me in the cell.
They said your cellmate is a murderer.
Yeah. Now this is the South Korean who had just been convicted of murder. And we are going to sleep with him.
Did you sleep that night, the first night?
I slept. What would I do? I slept.
But in person, was he a nice person? Did you have
Well, he
conversations?
taught me a few things. He taught me how to make beer. He taught me how to make beer with kondo. He taught me many things.
You made the beer in the prison?
Yeah, we used to brew beer in the prison. You manage to get kondo. And prison is interesting. But you get your kondo,
Yeah.
and you mix the kondo with yeast.
Yes.
Okay. And then you tie it in a white cloth and put it away.
For it to ferment.
Well,
Yeah.
I think so.
Uh-huh.
And then, dependent on how much alcohol you want in it, after a week or two, you mix it with water. And it's beer.
It had a kick. It could get you drunk.
More than drunk. That's beer, pure beer. And this kale was introduced to us by this South Korean
person.
There are some things I don't want to talk about.
So you left and he was still there. Did he ever leave the prison? Did they come?
I think under some arrangement with the South Korean government, he eventually left.
Okay.
But he taught us how to make beer and so many things. He used to go out, to work, and this guy would kill a python. Yeah,
The South Korean guy.
Yeah, he would kill a python and bring it into the yard. That's how he was supplementing his nutritional intake. And so
Did you enjoy some of the python with him?
I said there are some things that I don't want to talk about, my friend.
I can imagine you having some grilled python or I don't know.
But look, let me. The python is interesting.
Okay.
It's a mix between chicken and fish. It's very interesting, the
Combo.
texture.
Chicken and fish.
A mix between chicken and fish. And if you're in prison, it's useful, especially for those who are not getting visitors and so on, because you will die. You know, malnutrition will kill you.
Kill you.
So a lot of the prisoners depended on this South Korean who was occasionally killing pythons and bringing them. There must have been a lot of pythons around the
Yeah, I can imagine. So supplementing your diet.
But then I remember I was in the Southern prison with Kwesi,
Okay.
who became Secretary General of the Ghana TUC.
Yes.
So one morning I had python on the plate, and I entered his cell. He said, "What is that?" I said, "Python." He said, "Get out of my cell." You know.
Did he keep the head? The South Korean man. I mean, I must imagine that, like with the cats, the head is the prized part of the.
I don't know.
You just get the body.
I don't know. You know.
Were you tortured?
Yes, on a few occasions. On a few occasions, yes, I suffered what amounted to torture. Okay. There was one time I'd been arrested in Accra. I was being taken to one of the prisons outside Accra. And the guys who arrested me just kept driving me around for hours, you know. So eventually we ended up on the motorway. As we were driving on the motorway towards, you know, the eastern side, I mean, towards Ho and so on the motorway, the leader of this group actually said to my hearing that they should look for the ideal place to finish me off. That's torture.
Yeah, of course. 100%.
Yeah, that's,
you're in a moving car, you can't move.
Yeah, and says they should look for the ideal place so they can finish me off, and that I'm causing too much trouble. This prison thing is not.
It's not working.
It's not taming me, so they should finish me off. You know, I was sitting in the car, looking at this moron, you know, and it passed. I would count that as torture.
Yeah, definitely.
There was another time I was being interrogated at the Greater Accra headquarters of the Bureau of National Investigations. And
near immigration?
No, just here.
Oh, okay.
37 Military Hospital,
Mm-hmm.
you know. And as a matter of fact, the people who were interrogating were people I had known, you know. One of them was my wife's classmate and so on, you know. And they put me on a broken chair. Why? It must have been deliberate. I was on a broken chair for hours during interrogation, just to make me uncomfortable.
So it's not steady.
It's not steady.
Yeah, so you need to be balancing.
You are balancing and so on. They will not allow you to stand and so on. I thought that was torture. You know, that was torture. And then there was some standard practice. You are arrested. You are taken into a room. And as you're sitting down, you know, the agents, the security agents, the BNI operatives and so on, they come into the room and they engage in conversations with themselves. But you're left to no doubt that it's your history that they have reduced to conversations to themselves. And it can be very, very terrible.
So they're talking about you but not ignoring you.
Yes, you know, they appear to be engaged in conversation among themselves, but they're breaking you down.
Yeah.
Using, you know,
your story.
Using what they know of your history and twisting it and so on, you know, in order to psychologically damage you.
Yeah.
And this happened usually before interrogations. You know. So
what? Yeah.
Oh, Charlie, horrible things.
Yeah, what's an interrogation like? I mean, is there light on? In the movies you see, maybe they put a light on you, or they blast music.
I didn't
None of that.
experience any of those light experiences and so on, you know. But, they're sitting there, say, and then they make a remark, and the remark is definitely about you, and they're saying things about your family, and what they do and what they don't do, some of it not true, and so on, but just to wear you down.
Yeah, makes sense.
That's psychological torture.
Yeah.
Plain and simple, it's psychological torture.
How did you bear it? How did you go through it?
Oh, you block your mind. You block your mind. You block your mind. And I learned so many things in prison. One of the things that I learned in prison that I'm so happy that I learned, and I learned it from an American who had been arrested for espionage. And he taught me how to read fast. There are various methods of reading.
Mm-hmm.
Normally when we read, you read every word. Mm-hmm. You can actually learn to read by skipping some of the words, reading just the keywords.
Mm.
So for a whole paragraph of about 50 words, you can read maybe 10 words out of the 50 words and get the meaning of the paragraph.
The gist.
Mm. And I was so happy that I learned the skill.
Where have you used it, applied it?
Oh, on many occasions. Many occasions. So I tend to read very fast. Some of it, if you use it, you don't get the full import of what you are reading, but you get an idea of what you are reading, and it's still very useful.
Yes.
There'll be many situations where you have to read fast, especially in conferences and so on.
Exactly.
You go to a conference, and there's a huge document which is being discussed, you get it at the last minute and so on. Those methods help a lot, and I'm happy to have learned that in prison.
Was there a time where you felt truly alone when you were
Oh, there was a time when I cried. I mean, I don't normally cry, but there was a time when I cried. This was in the Navrongo prison in 1986. And a friend of mine had come from Accra to see me, lawyer Yao Opoku. He had come to see me. I was in the prison. And he told me that my twin boys had been born. They had been born, and I was in prison. I couldn't go home, and so on. And I broke down and cried. I don't normally cry.
No.
But that day, I don't know what happened. I broke down. I cried. I cried like a baby. I really cried.
Were you allowed to get home visits? Could your family come to visit you?
In some of the prisons, I allowed one visit a week. In some, for example, I was allowed one visit a week.
And how long should that visit last?
Oh, about an hour. In any case, what is there to talk about? You are in a cage and the person is standing outside and so on.
Oh, you don't even get to touch the person?
In some of the prisons, you are virtually in a cage.
Wow.
In a few of the prisons, you will sit in the head of the prison's office, and there must be a prison officer there recording everything you say.
Oh no! So listening to everything.
Listening to everything, and so it depends, But in some prison, for example, when I first got there was a cage. Eventually, they allowed me to meet my visitors in an officer's office, but then there's somebody there recording.
Could you get letters? Could you write letters? Could you receive letters?
If you got letters, I think it was allowed, but it had to go through the prison authorities. They read it.
Oh.
And if you wrote letters outside, it went through the prison authorities and they read it. But we found ways of smuggling letters who didn't go through the prison officers.
Okay.
But I won't tell you how. It may be necessary at some time in the future.
When was the last time you visited the Ghanaian prison system as a guest of the state, as a detainee? When was your last trip?
This must have been in 1993, I think.
Okay.
1993. No, before then.
Mm-hmm.
Because I'm told, I didn't know, but I'm told by some people who were in the PNDC then, ministers and so on, that at one stage, a decision was taken that no matter what I did, nobody should arrest me, because it was making me, in their words, popular.
Yeah.
And I was getting a lot of attention in the international media and so on. I was in the international media all the time. So they thought that it should stop. And this happened because I had come from the UK, I had come from London, you know, and I was arrested on arrival at the Kotoka International Airport.
As soon as you touched down?
Yeah, I was arrested on the tarmac. You know.
You didn't even get into the formalities of immigration?
I was arrested on the tarmac, and then I was taken to the BNI office in the airport. You know, and a lot of things happened, you know. But then within 2 hours of my arrest, the whole world was on fire, and I mean it, you know. They were getting, those days, fax messages.
Yes.
From members of parliament in the UK, from senators in the US, from France, from Germany. The whole world was on them. In fact, I'm told that the fax machine at the castle broke down. You know.
Fax system coming through.
They were coming. I mean, one of those who had actually sent a fax message demanding my immediate release was the Lord Eric Avery. He was a member of the House of Lords in the UK. You know, I think I was about the first person to send, you know. So, you know, I was released. I was released the same day.
The day that they arrested you on the tarmac?
I was released from the airport. I was in detention for only about 3 hours. So when I was released, the BNI officer asked me, what is happening? You know, they couldn't understand what was happening. I mean, but it was a trick. We had used a trick, you know. The night before I came to Ghana, I addressed a press conference in London. And at the press conference, I told the British media that I was going back to Ghana and I'll be arrested at the airport. And they said, how do I know? I said, well, it's the nature of the regime and so on. So the British press was actually on standby.
In Kotoka?
Something happened, Our Excellency. The British, everybody, I put the world on notice that I was coming to Ghana, I'll be arrested, and that it was even possible that I'll be killed, you know. So this alarm bell had been rung. And then in those days, how the airport was configured, you know, something could happen and nobody would know. So we decided that a number of people should be at the airport and positioned in certain places so that if I got out of the plane, they would see me. So there's a guy called Azuma Besori, you know, very good comrade of mine. So he was positioned at the airport and he saw my arrest. And he had a telephone number in London to call as soon as I was arrested. So as soon as I was arrested, he called the number. And that triggered all of these reactions, you know. And in fact, the number belonged to Napoleon Abdullahi, who became Ghana's ambassador to Mali and Cuba. I think it was his number which was used to trigger that operation, you know. So after a few hours of detention in the airport, I was released because they couldn't stand the pressure. The pressure was just too massive, you know.
I'm curious, did you ever meet Flight Lieutenant Jerry Rawlings face to face after all your trials?
I did. That was in 2001, January 2001. He insisted on seeing me.
Is this before the handover or after?
I'm not sure, but January
2001.
I think after the handover.
Okay.
But he insisted on seeing me. I refused to see him the first time. He had actually come to a friend of mine, Ralph Kesley-Hayford, you know. He had asked Ralph Kesley-Hayford to ensure that, you know, to try and get me to see him and so on. So eventually I got to meet him. And we spoke for 4.5 hours. Just the three of us spoke for 4.5 hours. It was in that meeting that he told me that he was not responsible for my arrest and detention. He actually told me that some of my friends were the people who were pushing that I should be arrested and detained, and that as a leader, he couldn't say no to them and so on. I tried to find out the truth, and the truth is much different. But we spoke for 4.5 hours, and it led to a lot of sensation. I mean, President Kufuor and others could not understand why, after all the struggle, I ended up in a meeting with Jerry Rawlings. But hey, what was I to do?
Because in '95, you were part of Alliance for Change.
Yes, I was part of the Alliance.
The Kumi Preku demonstrations against the VAT.
Yeah.
How did the planning of that, because that's such a big moment in Ghana's
No,
history.
to be honest with you, I mean, people claim all kinds of things. The truth is that it was Nana Akufo-Addo's birthday, and there was a party for him at the residence of J. Blankson. I wasn't at the party. So it was at the party that the idea of this demonstration came up. They discussed it. Weku Brobe was there. All kinds of people were there. So after the party, I was called by Ferdinand Ayim, who told me that this meeting had taken place and that there was an idea floating around for the organization of a demonstration, that I had been mentioned as a possible organizer. So I wasn't at the original meeting which took the decision in Ejiri Blankson's house. But immediately after the meeting, Ferdinand Ayim told me about it, and I got to meet Nana Akufo-Addo, Nyahota Makro, and others, and we started work, you know.
How do you organize a demonstration of that magnitude? What do you do?
Oh, that was a lot of work. Kafu, it was a lot of work. I mean, we worked so hard. Look, for the first demonstration that took place in Accra, there was no community in Accra that we didn't go. We virtually touched everybody, spoke to everybody, went to all the different constituencies, to the ward level, speaking, explaining why it was necessary for this demonstration to take place. And that took us about 2 to 3 weeks.
Basically, was that the VAT was too high and they had to get rid of it, is that correct?
No, I mean, that demonstration was not just about VAT, it was about everything. Everything. I mean, today I know some people in the NPP who say that it was just about VAT, and so it wasn't true. It was about everything. It was about detentions, it was about the economic conditions in the country. VAT was only the trigger, you understand? So we got to work, and again, to tell you the truth, none of us knew that the demonstration was going to be that big. None of us knew that the demonstration was going to be that big. I remember that morning, we had agreed to gather at the residence of Nana Akufo-Addo, opposite the Lima police station.
Yes.
So we were there. And we had planned the demonstration to start at a certain time. Way before that time, somebody came in and told us that, look, the crowd at the Kwame Nkrumah Circle was unbelievable.
Massive.
And that if there was no leadership, it could degenerate. You know. So immediately we wanted a few people to go there and ascertain, find out what the situation was. And I volunteered to go. I think there were 2 or 3 of us, you know. I was obviously the leader of the team. And, Massa.
When you got there and you saw the people, what was going through your heart?
By the time I got to busy internet, you know, around Apollo Theatre, I could only see a sea of people. So I couldn't get to the Kwame Nkrumah Circle. I mean, if I got to the Kwame Nkrumah Circle, I don't know what would have happened, you know. But just a sea of people, hundreds of people, thousands of people, you know. The roads were impassable, blocked. So I then decided to return. So I returned to Nana Akufo-Addo's house and told him that, look, we have to move immediately. All of us had to move immediately. Otherwise, something could happen in our name.
Why did you call the demonstration Kumi Preko?
It was part of the hype. Part of the things that mobilized people. I mean, it was a hype.
Kill me now.
Yeah, desperation and so on, you know. So we got there, and fortunately the security arrangement we had made, you know, worked. Otherwise, there would have been chaos. You know, we had made a simple security arrangement for us, and I think still is valid. For every demonstration, the front and the back are most important. If anything would happen, it would happen in the front of the demonstration or at the back of the demonstration. The back is even more complicated because you could get agents provocateurs, people who are not part of the demonstration, causing mayhem at the back. And if you don't have an eye at the back, they will do things in your name and spoil things and so on. So we had a security system which focused on the front and the back. I was in charge of the front, and Akoto Ampah was in charge of the rear. Okay. In the front, we had built a circle. Should I be saying all these things? In the front, we had built a circle. So the most prominent leaders were in the circle. Akufo-Addo, Nyahota Makro, Reku Brobe, Victor Newman, and so on, were in that circle. They had been completely encircled. They couldn't get out of the circle. So they were in the circle, and in front of that circle, there was a line of strong activists, carefully selected.
For what? What are the criteria for selection?
You know, I say strong.
Brawn.
Yeah, strong activists. You know. So I think there were 2 lines in front of them. So to get to them, you had to break between the first 2 lines
to get to the circle.
break through the circle
To get to
them.
Okay, so the circle was like a surrounded. You have people surrounding.
Circle.
Okay.
Human beings
Surrounding your core people.
You know.
Okay.
And I was in front of the lines.
2 lines.
And so on. And Akutuampa was at the back.
Similar arrangement at the back with the circle.
No, the
Or
back
lines?
didn't have a circle. The back had lines.
Okay.
Lines of strong people and so on, you know. And it worked. How we managed to do it, because we're talking about 100 to 120,000 people.
It's a lot of people that day.
And we managed to arrange this, you know. Of course, you know about the shooting and
Yes.
the death
Yes.
of Ahunu Honga
Honga.
and so on. Something very significant happened, you know, around Adabraka. A police van, there's a police officer, he was Dr. something, what is his name? Police officer called Dr. something, I'm sure you remember his name. He nearly became IGP. So, you know, so by the time we got there, we had all kinds of strategies for moving. By the time we got there, this police officer walked up to me and said, look, something was happening in the front and that they needed me to talk to them, otherwise there would be a catastrophe. Something very terrible would happen. Okay. So I called somebody to take charge of the front and join the police car to rush to the front to go and solve that problem. By the time we got there, the shooting had occurred. You understand? Otherwise, I've been in the range of fire.
Yeah.
You know.
And Honga died.
Ahunu Honga died. Many others died. A few others died. And some were injured in horrific ways. You know, somebody had his eye removed and so on. But that's history.
The reaction of the government to what happened, I mean, anything surprise you about how the government reacted to Kumi Prepo?
Now, I thought that they protected the criminals, those who had done the killing. You know, there was no proper investigation. Nobody was held accountable, and so on. And for me, that was a problem. I mean, if you open fire on demonstrators and kill them, you know, you have to be held accountable. You understand? And I know that the killing was not done by the security services. It wasn't done by the police. It was done by plainclothes activists. You know, the Tonton Makuts of the regime did the killing.
To make the demonstration look bad?
No, not to make the demonstration look bad. I mean, everybody knew that the demonstrators were not responsible for killing themselves, but to frighten people so that there wouldn't be another demonstration. And indeed, after this demonstration, many of the leaders of the Alliance for Change wanted us to stop. They didn't want us to go any further.
Because the plan was to go to Kumasi as well?
Yeah,
Yes.
I mean, but some of them were scared, you know. But we decided to go to Kumasi, you know. And a few of us, very few of us, decided that we'll go to Kumasi. And we told the leaders who were hesitating that if they didn't want to come to Kumasi, fine. We were going ahead to organize Kumasi. They should stay in Accra. We will organize Kumasi. And we moved to Kumasi and started the organization. You know, and then they realized that, look, they couldn't stay back. So they joined, you know. And Kumasi was much bigger than Accra. Kumasi, you're talking about 500,000 or more people on the streets. Never happened in our history. Even the Accra demonstration was unprecedented. Never had anybody managed to put more than 100,000 people on the streets. But we did, you know.
Would you say it was a success, Kumi Prepo? Even though some people lost their lives, I mean, the big picture, what you wanted to achieve?
Well, speaking now, and given the fact that some of us who were active in organizing this demonstration eventually found ourselves in government, one of us even became a president. The fact that they continued to implement the value-added tax and did some of the things that we were against, some of the things for which people demonstrated and died, it's difficult for me to call that a success. You understand?
I do.
Yeah, success, we put the largest crowds on the streets and so on. But we betrayed the objectives of the demonstration. And their own hungers died in vain. That's my regret.
Inside newspaper, how did that come about?
It was at a time when we were finding it difficult to get our message across. You know, first of all, even printing houses would not print messages which were anti-regime and hostile. And as for newspapers, the only newspapers that we were able to rely on then were the Ghanaian Voice, and then later came in the Chronicle and so on. There had been a few things with Free Press and so on, the Independent and all. But we felt that there was a need to have a clearly distinct left-wing mouthpiece, you know. And so we set up the Insight in 1993, I think. 1993, yes, I think 1993. As a weekly newspaper. I was then working with the Ghanaian Voice, or writing for the Ghanaian Voice, which was the largest circulating newspaper in the country. We're doing more than 100,000 copies per issue, you know, and so on. Then I set up the Insight with nothing. Set up the Insight with credit facilities for printing for 2 weeks. And a gift of newsprint from Kofi Kumsin, who was then the editor of the Chronicle. So from nothing, you know, from absolutely nothing. We printed on credit. The newsprint was free. I used the facilities of the Chronicle, I think for the first 2 issues, and eventually used the Independence facilities and so on. But then, since 1983, the Insight has been published. It's now a daily newspaper, and it's still alive.
What are some of your greatest achievements with the Insight? What are you most proud of?
Well, that we still exist is an achievement, you know.
Have you ever been sued?
Few times, once, twice, you know.
Who sued you?
Well, the immediate past government, the Ashanti Regional Minister sued us, and it's my friend, you know, Simon Osei Mensah. So I went to him and told him that, look, go and withdraw your suit. We will apologize to you, we'll retract the story, and so on, and you would look good, everything. If I said no, he wanted to go to court. It's okay, let's go to court. And he lost.
How much money did he want from you?
I've forgotten, you know, but he lost.
What was the story?
Some story alleging that he had made some ethnic pronouncements somewhere, you know. I knew that he had a bad case, but court litigation is too much. It wastes your time, your resources, and so on. So I wanted to cut it. So I said, look, we're going to apologize. Even though I think we are right, we are going to apologize. He said, no, he will go to court and so on. He spent a lot of time in court and lost. You know. There was another lawsuit. It didn't go anywhere. They lost. Because we are very careful about what we do and so on. I think there was one person who won a case against us. One. I think it was Hakman Usuajimai. I've forgotten what the story was about, but he won his case against us. And he's my friend. He's been my friend for a long time, you know. In the struggle for democracy, we used to work together all the time. In fact, most of the work was given to me and him to do, and I used to work from his house. And so I was wondering why he decided to go to court. But he went to court, and he didn't enforce the judgment, so we didn't have a case to go for, you know, appeal and so on, and he just died. But I think we've had 3 suits altogether, about 3 suits.
Have you sued anybody before?
No.
Have you been tempted to sue anybody before?
Well, I've been urged to sue people, but It's not been an option that I've taken. I mean, for example, this guy who was behind the allegation that I collected a bribe of 126,000 and then later came to apologize and said he made it up.
Oh.
You know, everybody said I should take him to court. And I said, let him go. And the fact that he's come to confess, you know, that he lied and that he did it because of some incentives, or you know, because he had been instigated by the political authorities, and so it was enough for me. There's no need to go to court. You know, his confession was enough.
It's enough.
Yeah.
You are known for your rapid fire analysis, as well as historical references and the consistent ideological position on your radio panelists. When you appear as a radio panelist, can you remember the first time you were on a morning show as a radio?
Well, not a morning show. I mean, my first radio program was in 1969.
69?
Yeah, my first radio program was in 1969.
You were 16 then?
Yeah.
15, 16?
Yeah. I mean, I had acted as Colonel Gaddafi. You know, there was a mock UN General Assembly session.
Okay.
And I played the role of Gaddafi. You know, so after that, I was approached by Frank Autry, Uncle Frank, who was then hosting the Uncle Frank show on GBC. And he approached me to work with him. So the first assignment he gave me was actually to be reading poems.
Okay.
So I started reading poems on Uncle Frank's show in 1969.
What kind of poems? What kind of poems?
I think the first poem he gave me to read was a poem called The Diamond in the Rough. You know, and so on. And he usually selected the poems
and you just read them.
I read them.
Okay.
And then one thing moved on to the other. I ended up doing Leaders of Tomorrow with Dusty Wayne and so on. So many of them, you know. And then the highlight was when I went on the Mike Egan show. I did the Mike Egan show a couple of times, not once.
Oh,
many
you were
times.
on his show?
I was on the show.
What was that like?
A long time ago.
Yeah, but I mean, Mike Egan was an icon.
The Mike Egan show was
that was the top show,
In
definitely.
the country. So I did Mike Egan show. Eventually, I became a regular interviewer on In Town.
Yes.
Around town. The program was around town. What's it called? In Town, with Emilia Cromwell Adama and so on. So we did that. And then I hosted Talking Point.
Oh.
I hosted Talking Point.
I see. How long?
More like a stand-in.
Okay.
You know, but I did Talking Point a few times.
Was it exciting?
Oh. Talking Point was the biggest talk show in the country.
Definitely. On a Sunday evening, nobody missed that.
It was the biggest talk show in the country.
Yeah.
You know? So I did that. And then I did also a program called Leaders of Tomorrow. Yes. I think it was Leaders of Tomorrow was done on GBC radio. But I did another show, another youth program, which was then produced by John Gafachi on television. Builders of Tomorrow.
Builders of Tomorrow.
Builders of Tomorrow. It was produced by John Gafachi, you know, and so on. So this continued. But interestingly, there's a long break. Around 1976, on one of the programs on TV, I had launched a very serious attack on the Western countries, especially Germany, for their colonial past and so on. There's so much protest that I had to leave. So there was a small break, you know, there was a lot of protest. I had to leave. And then 1979, there was also a short break in my career. I had to leave, you know, because the authorities didn't like what I was saying and doing and so on. And then after 1982, there was a longer break, you know, before I finally came back. My newspaper career actually started in Ghanaian Times in 1974. But before then, I'd been writing for newspapers and so on.
Did you do any journalism in?
I'm in the PENDREAM TV. Now, so far so good. Say open online portal e Ghana. Nipa share, nipa follow, nipa comment here. To my best of knowledge, without any biases. PENDREAM TV.